Okay, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to welcome a lot of great presenters we have today. Alan Wild to be in charge here, so he will be presenting everybody. Just a few remindings before we start. We have a Q&A box in the bottom of the page. Please send your questions using the Q&A box, and please keep in mind you have to send the question to everybody, not only to the presenter, because the presenter will not be reading the Q&A box. Alan, you can start now. Just
okay. Thank you very much, Milene, and it's my pleasure to be here and be the sort of master of ceremonies on the topic of economic level of water losses, and by that I'm distinguishing from just leakage. And we're going to go through some recent international experiences in a few countries. There are others that we are not covering out of interest of time, but maybe we could think about another webinar that would cover some other places. The lineup of speakers we have today is shown here with myself. I'll have a minor role in moderation. Stuart Crow, water management consultant in the UK, who works a lot with utilities in England, Wales, and Irish water, I believe.
Alan, sorry to interrupt you. You are not using the presentation mode, so it's
I know. If I use that, it makes my two screens. It messes it all up.
Okay.
Can people see the slide?
Yeah.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep
Okay.
going.
Okay. Anika Malm, hope I'm pronouncing that right, from the municipality of Kungsbacka, again, I hope, in Sweden, and she and others have worked on a SELL model for Norway and Sweden. Amy Talbot from the Regional Water Agency in California, who's working on issues between new standards coming in by the regulator and the utilities and suppliers. She's also the chair of the American Water Works Association chapter for California and Nevada. Ingeniero Marcelo de Pexe from Sanepar, which is one of the big state utilities, that is the state of Paraná in Brazil, who's worked a lot with Rita Caballero de Ferreira, and pardon me if that's not too good, who is the leader of the Proesa project in Brazil, which has worked on non-revenue water and energy efficiency in distribution systems in Brazil. Next, I just want to cover a few quick points on ELL and then pass it over. There are many facets and many angles or points of view on ELL. Real loss and apparent, transition models, steady state models, short run, long run. Stuart's going to go into some of those 2 points. Whether you stick with just a financial thing or bringing in the sustainable, the S in SELL on economic evaluation, and let's say the relationship and viewpoints of utilities on ELL and regulators. Those may not always be the same. ELL does connect with many different elements within a society, as shown in the PESTLE diagram. And I should shut my email off. One of the most important things in any effort to introduce or expand ELL is collaboration. You need a whole variety of actors involved, otherwise it won't work. Quickly, without going into details, I wanted to show that while economic level of leakage is often emphasized, there are, on a component basis, which is fundamental to ELL, there are parallels between the real loss components and the apparent loss components. And I showed this diagram to a few people, and there are various tweaks that could be made, but this is kind of a basic explanation of what I see as parallels between the two. Ultimately, what that means is you have a similar set of determinations to make, at least in steady state, where it's the intervention frequency, whether that's detecting leaks or it's checking meters and replacing them. There's an intervention frequency question that determines what your average losses are going to be. And you can work on the other elements of the components. Next, I want to just quickly highlight a couple of the, let's say, ups and downs, positives and negatives. ELL is a really powerful tool in terms of balancing the value of lost water and the cost to save it. And in a good world, a perfect world, it provides guidance on the best use of financial water resources, the best interest of citizens. It's focused locally, which is important. In many cases, it's not highly sensitive to inputs. In others, it is. And another important point is that can be represented as a range. You have what I call a valley here in the total cost. So you can operate in the valley as opposed to the very bottom of it. Along with collaboration, ongoing evolution, application, refinement is essential, and a key part of making it stronger. Now, on the other hand, there are, let's say, some downs, what I would call controversies or difficulties. You know, is this the right methodology for us? Is this just some bothersome regulation? Different points of view between financial regulators and water resource regulators, and we see this in many countries. There's a lot of orientation and training. Rita's going to talk about some excellent work on that. And a lot of more detailed elements on the technical aspects. You can dig very deep on parameter estimation to get very accurate results, or kind of an approximate ballpark starting level guidance model. And I just have a little map, since I like maps so much, of countries where I've seen considerable evidence, those are in dark blue, of the use of ELL, and others where I believe that's true. I don't have too much evidence of it. Some places that I note with extensive activity are Korea, Iran, and some others. This is our agenda for today. We're going to have 3 speakers, Stuart, Anika, and Amy, then have a short Q&A session, and I'd like to limit it, excuse me, to clarification questions, not starting a debate about I think you should have done this or whatever, but what did you mean by such and such? Then the 2 Brazilian presenters, and again, a short clarification question session from the second group of presenters. And then there'll be some time, hopefully 15 minutes, where we can have more open Q&A and some discussion. We'll see how the time goes, and I'm about, or actually a little over my time. So let me hand it to Stuart.
Not sure the.
Stuart, you are on mute right now. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm just trying to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
We see you.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Alan asked me to talk about the history and the approach to ELL in the UK, and because of that, I've got a lot of slides and not that much time to present them. So excuse me if I go a bit too quickly, but as Alan says, we have a Q&A session for any clarification. And also I'll give my email address at the end, so please contact me if you would like to. And I'll refer to some reports which are available on the internet as well as we go.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your slides. I'm seeing you. Is that my fault?
No, Alan, it's working. I think it's your screen.
All right. Well, I've seen Stuart's before, but go ahead. Sorry to interrupt, Stuart, please.
Yeah,
go ahead.
try and work that out, Alan. Okay, as long as everyone else can see, that's fine.
Nothing come poop as far as this goes.
Okay, so in terms of the history, I've split our history in the UK on ELL into 3 sections, which represent where we are with the industry. So pre-privatization, post-privatization, and then recent changes just in the last few years. So pre-privatization, before 1974, there were 28 statutory water companies in the UK, which supplied some of the towns and cities. But most of the water supply was in local authority control through the county water boards. In 1974, those water boards were amalgamated into 10 regional water authorities. But in terms of ELL, before 1974, everything was really about short-run ELL. It was about managing operating costs. Post-privatization, the 10 authorities, regional authorities, were privatized. And because of that, they had to produce business plans, and they had to have those business plans regulated and approved for setting prices. So because of that, we started to think about long-run ELL. Since 1989, some of those companies have merged. There have been acquisitions. In Scotland, there were 3 regional water authorities created, and then a single unitary company, Scottish Water, was created. And in Northern Ireland, again, we now have Northern Ireland Water. So across the UK, the companies are required to produce plans every 5 years for price setting in England and Wales to OFWAT, and for water resource management to the Environment Agency in England and Natural Resources Wales in Wales. And then we have similar arrangements with WICS and SEPA in Scotland, and with the utility regulator and NIEA in Northern Ireland. So between 1989 and now, we look at long-run ELL and SELL, and I'll explain the difference between those. Recently, though, we've been requested by OFWAT to go below SELL. OFWAT set a challenge to the companies, and there are now only 17 companies because of mergers, to reduce leakage by 15% in the current asset management period between now and 25-26. So that's going below SELL. So this is what we have. I won't go into detail, as I think I've explained. Scottish Water and Northern Irish Water are in public ownership. The rest of the UK is in private ownership. And this is what we produce every 5 years. We produce, this is Anglian Water's Water Resource Management Plan. It has a 25-year planning horizon. It's updated every 5 years. And this is the page which refers to demand management and leakage, the leakage forecast. These are available online if you want to search for Anglian Water Asset Management Plan or Water Resource Management Plan. I'm sure you'll find it. Google will find it. And then Welsh Water, this is the business plan, which is used for price setting. And again, in there, there's a page or two on water efficiency and leakage reduction. So like every good movie, it always starts with where we are now, and then it goes back in history to see where, how did you get here? And the furthest I've been able to go back is to this little book, produced in 1875 by the engineer for Liverpool Corporation, Joseph Parry. And it talks about economic level of leakage and sounding of fittings. It also, in that circle, if you can see it, talks about district metering, which I found interesting. It has pages about the situation in New York as well. And then the mid-century, middle of the 20th century, a paper by Gledhill, who was the engineer at Sutton Water Company, talks about an economic method of waste control. And you can see on the page here some cost curves. And it's quite a detailed paper. When I found it in my stash of reports and papers in preparing for this presentation, there's a lot of information in there. And again, in 1974, symposium on water, waste of water for the Institution of Water Engineers, a lady called Judith Rees produced quite a detailed paper on economic level of leakage. Again, though, it was all short-run economic level of leakage. The first real industry-wide research was carried out after a drought, quite a major drought in the UK in 1976, and led to the production of Report 26, which became the key reference document for leakage for a good 20 years or so. And in there you can see it defines the problem in clause 4.01. It's clearly uneconomic to ensure that pipelines and reservoirs will never leak. It's also clear that there's an economic limit to the loss of water that should be tolerated through leakage. But Report 26 didn't really go into a lot of detail about how you should assess the economic level of leakage. It was only again in the early 1980s, again, Judith Rees produced another paper, a second look at economic level of leakage. And then one of my colleagues, when I was at the water company, Newcastle and Gateshead Water Company, David Shaw, produced a model, an economic model. And this was the first time in my career that I saw this curve that Alan has shown, balancing the cost of detection and the cost of the lost water. And then we had another drought in the UK in the late 1980s, and that led to a major research project, the UK National Leakage Initiative, and the definition in what was called Report C. I chaired the group that looked at economic level of leakage, and you can see down here it defines that the economic level is that level of leakage where the marginal cost of active leakage control equals the marginal cost of the leaking water. Then another drought in 95, 96. We seem in the UK to have droughts. That brings leakage to the attention of the public and the media, and then we do some research and publish some reports. I think it was 1997, Alan Lambert, myself and Stephen Myers got together and produced this document for Financial Times. And again, we talked about economic intervention frequency and natural rate of rise and so on. And then updates to managing leakage in 2011, which David Pearson, who's on the call, was involved in, and Joe Parker, who's a member of the water loss group, was involved in this as well. And we recommended a zonal approach where we calculate ELL at a zonal level, taking account of all of these factors, and then we gross it up to the company. So ELL is the balance somewhere between the current level of loss and the unavoidable level of loss. Where do we land in that range? So short-run ELL, to come on to some of the definitions, short-run ELL is about balancing the steady state. So this is with current infrastructure, current pressure, looking really at active leakage control, find and fix only, but maybe some simple pressure management. So it's steady state. And Alan asked the question, which I think led into this, is do we include repair costs or not? And the answer to Alan for short run ELL is no. And that is because those repair costs are probably similar year on year. And what you're doing here is balancing, is influencing the runtime of those leaks by active leakage control and the flow rate from those leaks by pressure management. But generally you have the same number of leaks and you have to repair the same number of leaks. So the factors affecting ELL down here: background level of leakage, the natural rate of rise of leakage, the cost of water, cost of ALC, and what you're doing with pressure management. And I won't go into detail, but these are the things that you include in the cost of water when you're looking at short run ELL. Terminology, I've referred to some things already. So steady state is where the annual rate of repair is in sort of equilibrium with the rate of breakout. Backlog is where you're not repairing leaks at the rate in which they're building up, and so you build up a backlog of leaks in the network. And to reduce that backlog, you have a transition cost, and this is where, Alan, you should take repair costs into account. And David might forgive me for showing this diagram, which I produced some time ago to try and explain this situation. I'll try and do it as briefly as I can. Imagine a train on a track dropping off leaks or barrels of water along the side of this track, and it's followed by another train picking those leaks or those barrels of water up, and it's running at the same speed. the distance between those trains is equivalent to the level of leakage in your network. To reduce the level of leakage, the second train speeds up, picks up the barrels of leakage or repairs the leak, and you have a new steady state. It can't overtake the train in front, but the distance between those trains is equivalent to the level of leakage. And that's where we bring transition costs and repair costs into account. So when starting to now move on to long run ELL, everything we do with leakage follows a law of diminishing returns. Speeding up repairs is probably the most cost effective, then active leakage control, then pressure management. And then we get into some of the more expensive options of mains replacement and so on. And when we're looking at long run, we need to take account of the demand forecast. We need to take account of the headroom, the difference between the available supply and the demand. And as demand in the network increases, we start to reduce headroom. So the value of water will depend on how much headroom you have and how that changes over time.
Stuart, you need about 4 minutes or so to go. I'm sorry to press you, but
run through as quick as I can, Alan.
Yeah.
So we, in one of the research reports that was done, we had a flowchart for establishing ELL. I won't go into detail, but you can see it follows two tracks. One is where you have sufficient headroom down the left-hand side, and one is where you have insufficient headroom down the right-hand side. And in the UK, we had a tripartite study involving the regulators in 2002, and they came up with a methodology of what we call least cost plan for looking at the long run economic level of leakage. And this is where we look at the available headroom, the target headroom, and as that headroom starts to reduce, we have interventions. So ALC phase 1, pressure management phase 1, infrastructure replacement phase 1, and so on, to manage that demand to maintain the available headroom. And the least cost plan is coming up with the least cost series of interventions to maintain that headroom. Then that tripartite review was reviewed again, and there was a feeling that we needed to do more and put more value on the water. So this is where instead of just looking internally at short run and long run costs within a company, was including what we call externalities. So environmental and social costs, and that's the difference between long run ELL and sustainable ELL, is that SELL includes social and environmental costs and other externalities. I won't go into this, everyone will be free to read the slides at their leisure after the event, but these are the things that these are some of the external factors that influence the value of water and also the cost of leak reduction. And this diagram sums it up. It sums up the difference between going from left to right, short run, long run, and sustainable ELL, and then from top to bottom, unconstrained and constrained. As I say, I don't have time to go into detail, but you can see, what should be taken into account in each of those situations. SEL was reviewed in 2012. I was part of the SMC team that reviewed it, and we made we drew some conclusions, one of which was that it was becoming a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in that SEL was heavily influenced by the background level of leakage and various other things. And we made some recommendations, which again, I don't unfortunately have time to go into. But since that report was produced, we've started to move away from SELL. And the main reason for that is shown in this diagram in a PwC report from 2019. You can see on the top diagram that leakage flattened off. After reductions during the 1990s, the level of leakage in England and Wales is essentially plateaued at about 3,000 megalitres a day. And there was a challenge for all of the companies to become upper quartile, which we tried to point out was nonsense, that not every company can be upper quartile in terms of length of mains and litres per property, because they all operate in different environments. But this is the final slide. You'd be glad to know, Alan, to keep on time. Each year, OFWAT produce what's called a service and delivery report, and they look at a number of KPIs. that again, you'll be able to find this report online. One of those KPIs is leakage, and essentially the companies are now assessed as to whether they've met their leakage target or failed their leakage target. All of the companies accepted this challenge of reducing by 15%. I think some of them may be starting to regret that, because I gather that some companies have failed their target for 2021. Most have passed, but some have failed. So again, excuse me for going very quickly, but if you do have any questions, please email them to me or do them through the chat screen. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much, Anika.
Wait, I want to point out one thing. I just highly recommend people look at those service delivery reports. I think they're brief but detailed. I find it to be very useful. And second point, you can see the process involved in the UK. This is not done overnight. And there are a lot of lessons learned along those years. So now, Anika.
Hi. Thank you for your time. I'm Annika Malm, and I will talk about this model that we have developed and about the ELL and CELL in Sweden and sort of Norway too. And me, I like the public mission to work within the municipality, and also I like the learning and analysis, and I like to work together to achieve improvement. So that's made me a head of Department of Water and Waste here at the municipality of Kungsbacka in the southwest of Sweden. And just a short context, that Sweden and Norway are not so dense countries, as you may know, and our municipalities are quietly small, all of them. So that's a challenge, of course. And we are all public, and we have plenty of good water in most areas, most of the time. We have some difficulties in some areas, but we are very lucky with the water, as you can say. And the leakage or the water losses in Sweden and Norway and the whole of Europe, you can see here, it's quite old figures now, but you can see Norway are almost in the top, and we are not so good either. And we always compare us to Denmark, and they are always best in class almost. But they don't have so much water as we have, so it's a history behind that. And our journey about this cell and how we will calculate and work with water losses, it has increased on a national level. We used to talk about percentage and cubic meter per kilometers a day, and we do, of course, now too. But we also have started to measure and work with ILI. And on the utility level, we use, of course, the percentage and the cubic meter per kilometer a day or cubic meter per connection. But we have started to use the ILI and CELL in Sweden and Norway as well. But there are some front runners, but not everyone is using it, of course. So the main drivers that we have that for working more with the water losses and talk about this thing. The first thing is the EU, that we have EU will demand every country with all municipalities with more than 50,000 people would have to report the water losses. And the number they are talking about at the moment is the ILI number. And for Sweden, that would be very convenient because we have almost all of those values, those data for almost all of the municipalities. So we just have to add the length of the service pipes and the pressure. And of course, the pressure is not easy to calculate, but you can have an estimation of that. The second driver is the digital revolution, that the smart water metering and decision support systems is rapidly increasing. As I'm just shocked of the figures of about how many smart meters there are in Sweden, because if I had to guess before I saw these numbers, it would be 5%, because so it's have rapidly increased all over Sweden in small municipalities as well. And also these limited resources, at least we have to have restrictions in the southeast of Sweden, or mostly, that we can't use water to everything we want to use water to. And that's quite a new thing for us. So we have major drivers to work with water losses, and this is the work we have done to help the municipalities and utilities to work with these water losses and to calculate the cell. And I have not the time to go through the model in the whole, but you can download it, and you can download also the spreadsheet in Swedish from the web page from the Swedish Water and Wastewater Association. So it's a spreadsheet and a report, one for Sweden and one from Norway. And the author is, I'm one of the author, and also John Rustam from Powell and Value Infrastructure, and some partners from my former workplace at RISE, Research Institute of Sweden. And this is, as Stuart showed, the ingoing components of our model. And the blue is the one that are the economical level of leakage, the cost for having water losses, and the cost for management. And the light blue is things that we have not used in Sweden and Norway, because, for example, the climate is included in the taxes of the price or of the electrical price. So some effects are we are working with it anyway, so it's not included in the model. And the purple is the cell component, the sustainable, not economical values. And the one with the stars is negative, because of course goodwill will improve if you have water loss management, and also the innovation and growth, because you need more digital and new measurements. And one way of looking at and using this cost-benefit analysis and the way of comparing different solutions to decrease the water losses is a study we did in Sweden about 10 years ago. And we compared 4 different ways of reducing the water losses to a target. And as you can see in the model, we used we included uncertainties in the model, so it's a Monte Carlo simulation. And you can see that increased replacement is not that efficient as measurements solutions, and also more people working with this. And you get a positive net present value if you use district meters and more personnel. But I think this study is it's 10 years ago, and with this digital revolution, I think you should have even more spread results today. And some examples from Sweden and Norway about this. The left thing is from Powell, a decision support to know where your leakage are, and that we have it in Kungsbacka as well, and it's very it's more and more common. And from the right hand side, it's the utility in the south of Sweden that have used satellites to look for water losses. So it's new technology is getting the right way for us and for the leakage reductions. So the conclusion of the study or the project we did is that, of course, ELL and CELL, it's for you when you are managing the utility itself. So you have to find your own level, and then you need to know how you should work with it in your utility. But you get a very good help with this spreadsheet that we developed. And ILI, we think in Sweden, it's good for benchmarking between different cities, because we have it's so different. Some municipalities have a very long length of pipes and others are very dense. So this ILI is good for us to benchmark between cities and utilities. And when you work with this, you get control of your water losses and you get control of your system, and that is also a value. So we will continue our journey, and I think we will with these drivers we will work more and more with water losses in Sweden and Norway. Now I will talk a little bit about my municipality or the water utility in Kungsbacka. We have it's about 85,000 inhabitants, and we are not a dense city. But we have moderate water losses and great ILI, I think. But even so, we have started a leakage program for learning and for control, because, as I said, we want to have control of the system, and we also want the digital journey within the personnel. So if we use this kind of digital help and leakage programs, we will have improvement in all the personnel categories for digital measurements and things like that. And also our political board have achieved a new goal, and it's to achieve a sustainable level of leakage. I think that's a very good goal for us. So of course we have to calculate that. And the water losses, as I said, it's quite good. It's about 2.7 cubic meters per kilometer a day, and it's decreasing. And the ILI is 8.8, and if you like to compare, it's 100 liters per connection a day. And the cell value, and it's about band 8 in World Bank Institute system, and the cell number is 2.6 cubic meters per kilometer a day. So we did calculate it, and we can see here. You can see how you did how we did the calculation, and what the water meters or the district meters are the highest cost, and the highest benefits is the knowledge and the goodwill. And the solution is, and you can also see here that we don't need so much budget to work on this. Of course, we have some improvement of the system as well, and it's not included here. So it's just what we put in the efforts of leakage control management. But you can also see that the cell is not, it's not getting higher, so we can decrease more without getting a worse cell. So we will keep up the work even if we are on target. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika. That was really excellent. And that last curve makes me think of some initial calculations we're doing on the rate of decline in different countries. And we can't get into that today, but something we're going to be looking at. Let me pass it now to Amy on situation in California.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear and see my screen. I'm going to talk about the developing water loss standards in California. So before we get into that, I just want to give you a brief history over water audits and validation in the state. Several decades ago, a nonprofit group called the California Urban Water Conservation Council is a nonprofit that was operating in the state. About half of the large suppliers in the state were a member of, and they were submitting audits on a voluntary basis, essentially. So there is some history of doing audits within the state prior to setting these regulations. So that was ongoing. And then in 2015, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 555, which did a couple of things. It required level 1 audit validation for all urban retail water suppliers. Those are suppliers that deliver at least 3,000 acre feet of water a year, or that have 3,000 connections. So that was the first thing. The second thing was to adopt rules requiring urban water suppliers to develop performance standards for the volume of water loss, which in this case means real loss, not apparent loss, as it's being interpreted. One important stipulation for those performance standards is that it should employ full life cycle cost accounting when evaluating meeting those standards. So that's a little bit different than economic level of loss and what's cost effective and some of these other economic evaluation kind of terms. So that's the full life cycle cost accounting is what's written into the actual legislation. So from that bill, then we kind of moved into, okay, well, now we need to do level 1 audits for essentially 400 water suppliers. How do we do that? So the California Nevada section of AWWA came up with a validator certification program. Right now, we've got about 100 professionals that are certified to do audits in the state, and then agencies can choose who they want to audit or to validate their audits. Another important development that was really supporting the implementation of Senate Bill 555 was the development of the technical assistance program that was also run through the California Nevada section and in coordination with WSO and Kavanaugh. Basically had water loss experts sitting down with those 400 suppliers to walk them through the first year of doing that validated audit. I think it was a extremely successful program, in my opinion. I heard tons of positive feedback from it. And I think that really got us started on a more solid footing with implementing these regulations. And then, as I say that, there is always the ongoing issue with water audit data quality and uncertainty of it from year to year. And it is a learning process. So, even though you can learn everything you need to know, doing audits and getting them validated is continuous learning, and the data quality should improve over time. Okay, so with setting these performance standards, you can think of it in kind of two parts that act together. There's the economic model that actually sets the water loss standard, which is in gallons per connection per day. And then there's the policy side of things, these kind of policy decisions that kind of guide how you interpret and apply those standards. So I'll go over a little bit of both, but let's start with the economic model. So this economic model basically is built on statewide default inputs for both cost assumptions and water loss assumptions. The current defaults that are set in the model do lead to very low targets for most agencies. However, the good news is that you can customize the majority of those defaults with local, custom, supplier-specific data. You just have to justify it and submit it to the State Water Resources Control Board, which is the regulator of this regulation. The way it's set up is that you have one target per supplier. However, some suppliers have multiple potable systems within their service area. So one system might, it's hydrologically separate, but might service, let's say, 5,000 households, while another system down the street services another 7,000 households or something like that. If this is the case, then you would run the model for each of those subsystems, and then the target that is produced by the model would then be kind of combined using a certain ratio formula, and then you would get one supplier target overall. Sorry if that was a little confusing, just wanted to cover that. The water loss targets are, and the methodology is set to be complete, or at least take its final form by 2023. And then agencies are required to meet whatever that target is by 2028, and then maintain that into the future on a rolling 3-year average using your water loss audit data, gallons per connection per day, to kind of prove that. And then all of this kind of economic model stuff is again sandwiched with kind of these policy influence decisions that I'll get to later. So it's quite the setup. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the model itself. It is a transition model, like was discussed earlier. Basically, you're at one point, you need to get to another point, you get there, and then you have to maintain that over time. It is not an optimization model. There has been some debate of whether, should we use a transition model? Should it be optimization? So that discussion seems to be still active, although what is being presented is a transition model. Part of that model includes the real loss component analysis. So that really runs the water loss side of things, and then it's sandwiched with cost data and other factors, but it is embedded within this transition model. And then again, the model sets a target at a future steady state based on a backlog of unreported leakage, or based on a backlog of unreported leakage when it is eliminated. And then essentially, what the model does is calculate the cost-benefit ratio over 30 years. And it says, if your cost-benefit ratio is less than 1, you're required to maintain your current leakage based on your baseline data, which is about 3 years of average audit data prior. And then if your benefit cost ratio is equal or greater than 1, then you get the model calculated water loss target. So it's a little bit of a step function. So it's like choose your own adventure. If you're under 1, you go this way. If you're equal or over 1, you go this other way. So what happens when we go and we plug these numbers in? So right now, there's one version of the economic model was December 2020. And so with the default data, this is not using utility specific data, but just based on prior audit data and then the model default. You can see here what the targets end up being. It's a pretty good spread. So you can see here there's 157 suppliers that are required to maintain their current loss, so they have a 0% reduction. And then 119 suppliers that must reduce their real loss by more than 50% in 5 years. So you can kind of see here we're around 50, and you can see how the numbers work out to get to 100. So this was sourced from the M-Cube David Mitchell memo that we had done for this purpose. Okay. All right, so another way to look at all of those numbers is to see it here in the chart. So again, it's the same model, same version, same default data, but you can see here the average real loss, which is the current loss for these 400 suppliers, is in blue, and the spread here is the real loss gallons per connection per day there at the bottom. And then just using the default data in the model, the green represents where the state would like to transition all of these agencies to. So you can see it's quite a bit of movement for about a 5-year period. Okay, so where are we at right now? So we've been working on this for a couple of years. The model's been out for a couple of years. We've provided feedback as suppliers and other stakeholders, environmental groups. So right now, we haven't entered the formal rulemaking process where the final version of this regulation will be approved. So right now we're kind of in this in-between area where we're trying to figure out, how do we get the model and the regulation to a spot where we can say, yes, we have feasible targets that can be implemented that represent, forward movement in the field of water loss in California. So we still think that there should be some improvements to the model. At this point, because we are a couple of years in, we think it's pretty unlikely there's going to be substantial changes to the transition model itself. We have proposed a couple of what I would say are quick and easy suggestions that can be fixed within the model itself. But we are currently undergoing some analysis right now with WSO to do sensitivity analysis for some of these suggestions to see how much impact they would make to the overall group of 400. Let's say we change the annual rise in price of water. Right now it's set at 4.6% to 1.3%. How many agencies would that change the target for? Because it's based on cost benefit ratio. What we're seeing right now with the preliminary results of that analysis is that there's pretty limited impact. This is still kind of in the works, so we can't say that for sure, but we are kind of throwing some suggestions out there based on our educated knowledge, but then also trying to figure out how much of impact that will have. The other thing about the economic model is that when agencies are working with it, there's really no intuitive movement between variables. If you change the variable production cost, it does not automatically change the target or even sometimes the cost benefit ratio. So that's been kind of a challenge of trying to get agencies to work with the model because it doesn't move exactly how you would think it would be. So that's something kind of an ongoing education process that we're doing within the state. And then the other way to improve the economic model is to customize it. Right now, everything we're doing, all the analysis and everything is based on default data that the state has kind of provided. And I'm really encouraging agencies to customize it. There are a couple of inputs that seem to move the targets more than others, which is infrastructure condition factor, rate of rise, avoided costs, and then leak detection frequency, among others. And so agencies are really right now taking the next couple of months to try to customize their inputs. And then once you customize, you have to submit to the state for approval. Okay, so the model again is kind of sandwiched with these other policy decisions of how to implement it. One example is the compliance plan. We're calling a compliance plan option. If you have a target that is 30% reduced from your baseline and you meet a certain cost benefit ratio threshold, and you can improve your data validity scores over time, and you try to customize the model, you would basically say, I can't meet this target, but I can do these other things. And that would be an option to work with the state if you, in theory, get a target that you cannot be reached. You can see here, there's a couple of other examples of how we're proposing to handle and support disadvantaged communities that might not be able and might have the funding to be able to implement their target. And then we're thinking also with the off-ramp of utilities that already have a low level of loss. They've already done OFWAT, they've maintained it. How do we accommodate those sort of utilities? And then how the model is set up, if you have a benefit cost ratio of less than 1, then you have to just maintain your current loss as a 3-year average baseline. But just inherently in the model itself, if you're less than 1, then the model says it's not cost effective for you to even maintain that loss because you're less than 1. So what do we do about that? So there's still some kind of issues stemming off how the model is set up and just characteristics of certain suppliers that need to be worked out.
Amy, I know you're close to the end, but we need to wrap up pretty quick.
Okay, my last slide. So in summary, formal rulemaking for this process is, we think, slated for fall of 2021. There's an initial 45-day comment period, and then after that, it can go up to a year. I think it's unlikely that it'll take a year just because we've been working on this for a while. Really encouraging suppliers to customize the model. You don't know exactly how it's going to work for you if you don't put your custom data in there. Also recommending you review your past audit data because that is the baseline for the model, those 3 years of the audit data. So go back sure and make sure that it's accurate. And then just document all your water loss actions and costs just over time as we're going to be implementing. I think having that information is going to be very important. Again, we're not really sure where the model is going to land. There's some changes that could be made, but we know that there's not going to be substantial changes. In the meantime, we're working on those policy decisions to help the outlier suppliers, with certain conditions and situations. And then again, just want to end saying, I think there's a lot more training and technical assistance that's going to be needed to effectively and successfully implement these. Something like the technical assistance program, I think would be warranted here for this type of regulation. And with that, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box or feel free to email me, and I would love to answer them. All right, thanks, Alan. I'll stop sharing now.
That's a great image there of no, never mind. Thank you. You think about the idea of a regulation for 4,000 suppliers, it's kind of a daunting task, but we have actually very few questions in the chat, and in some ways that's good in that we can make up some time, but let me just summarize. They were answered by the author or the presenter. So the first question related to OFWAT and the UK and what would happen if the performance commitments were not met. And the basic answer is they would be subject to penalties or fines and rewards if they exceed or do better, I mean. There was also a question, terminological, Anika used a DFM, which is district flow meter. It's essentially like a DMA. That's really it on questions. If anybody else has one, they can quickly put it in the chat bar. Otherwise, we're going to move south to Brazil. Yeah, let's do that because we're running a little behind. But thanks, Amy. Very interesting, challenging situation. So I turn it now to Marcelo, who is going to cover the technical aspects of a model that's been developed in Brazil, along with his colleague, well, let's say partner, Rita. Marcelo's going to cover the, let's say, technical elements, and Rita more the model introduction, the institutional issues, et cetera. So let's go to Marcelo now, who is from the Sanepar utility in south central Brazil in the state of Paraná. Okay.
Thanks, Alan.
Yep.
It's a pleasure to stay here to share my experience in the economic model, and I will show this some topics here. And I will start with before 2010. We had some questions like what is acceptable water loss for allocation? Sanepar operates 345 municipalities, but what is a good water loss for each location? How much resource is it worth investing to reduce losses? How low should we go? Then I watched Alan's presentations at the Water Loss Congress 2010 when he presented this document. And I thought, problem solved. So I start.
You're exaggerating, but anyway, go ahead.
I started to study the topic, and I realized that I had another problem. We need a water balance. We need more data, field data. But now we have a translated and updated manual, which Rita is going to present. I start with the apparent loss because for me it was easier and I had more data. We have a revenue curve and a commercial loss control curve. And we look for the optimal level, the higher financial result between the revenues and costs. Here is the equation that determines this point. And we made some improvements in this model, like the inclusion of the initial meter under registration of the new meters, calculation of what I called a net tariff, discounting the government taxes and fees, and a model application for each cubic meter of consumption. Instead, just one calculation for the whole, considering the average. This because for different consumptions, we have different price in the tariff. And sometimes the cost of the meter is different. And for example, if the average consumption is 12 cubic meters, we will have one result in terms of optimal under registration and time for replacement. But that is different if the consumption is 18. It's different if it's 23. So in this way, we have more accuracy and that origined a new policy for meter replacement. In the real loss model, we have a variable water loss production cost, a capital cost for expansion, and the control cost. We look for this minimum point at the total cost curve. But here is more difficult because we need the data from specific location. That depends on the specific characteristics. Some improvements made in this model is a regionally based capacity expansion cost, a modest ongoing main replacement to main network in good steady state condition, and empirical research on magnitude of background reported and unreported losses. Because one of the important things in this model is the need to estimate the volume of these three components: the background, the unreported leaks, and reported leaks. Because the model works on the reduction of unreported leakage, and that depends on the rate of rise and leakage detection frequency. And we call alpha the background leakage and reported leakage, and beta the unreported leakage, is the increase per year of the unreported leakage. And here is an example of minimum night flow. You can see it doesn't fall vertically, but the point here is in this time something we make an action to reduce the leakages. But why not here, or why not here in different times of intervention? So this is what the model will say to you. And for this, we use some concepts like burst and background estimate, fixed and variable area discharge, and unavoidable real loss. But this requires field data, lots of field data. And for that locations, without field data or with not so reliable, I make some empirical study trying to correlate this with total loss. And we have good results, especially for beta. And then it can help the work of Rita will present in the sequence. And then we did a study on the time to expand production capacity. Because here, when we have high losses, it's necessary to expand the capacity sooner. But if you have low real losses, this same expansion can be delayed. So we can determine these costs for each location. Here is an example of this cost by region in Brazil. And that is an example of the result of the real loss model. We look for this yellow point here. In this example, the economic level is 17 liters connection day. But we realize that here we have a patamar, an interval. We can set up an interval in this example between 63 and 80 liters connection day. The total cost is very similar. So the target don't need be exactly a point, but it should be an interval. And the width of this interval is influenced by the magnitude of and the shape of this green curve, the capacity expansion curve. So for example, if the costs are small, both capital curve is small, costs, the economic level is higher and the interval is wide. But if costs are higher, if you increase the costs, the economic level is lower, like 73 goes to 63, and the interval is smaller. So you need to pay more attention in this situation than this. The total cost here will increase faster. And here I show preliminary results of some of the systems with a big difference between the actual water loss and the economic level. Other systems are closer and some are already in the economic level. And that is interesting because we understand that there is no magic number for that question. What is a good water loss index? Is 100? Is 200? Depends on the specific characteristic. Here, for these places, 100 liters connection day is a good indicator. For this, around 200. For this, 300. That depends on the place. And now we start to study the evolution. How many times we need to achieve this economic level. So here is an exercise for try to understand the target rates of leakage reduction to achieve that economic level in 5 years. Some system probably will take more than 5 years to achieve that economic level. So the identification of economic level of losses make it possible to optimize the available resource. The economic model is very useful for setting targets and investments, and the time needed to reach the economic level varies from place to place. Thank you. Here's my mail, and we can ask you some question later. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Alan, you are muted. You are not, we can't listen to you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Rita. I was just thanking Marcelo for a good presentation. There is a question we will get to after your presentation, Rita. So please go ahead, Rita.
Rita, now you are on mute. Please unmute yourself.
But I wasn't talking. I was sharing my screen. Okay, let's start.
Thank you.
So first of all, are you seeing my screen? I suppose so. Okay. First of all, thanks IWA for inviting. Thanks Ellen. Thanks to the other from Sweden and from California who are here with us and from England. And I'm going to talk about upscaling of the ELL across Brazilian utilities and regulators. This upscaling had several steps. The first of them was translating the model, then understanding it, and then putting hands on it, and then also teach and communicate the model. While we were teaching and communicating, we had many questions, and we were still refining and checking how others do and so on. And then we had also bilateral assessments until we finally closed it, and now we publish it. But it was kind of a loop. It was very one thing goes with another. These are I'm not going to, I know numbers are always very interesting, but with these 2 slides, I don't want to show the numbers. I just want to say that the numbers exist for every municipality in Brazil. We have this map of apparent water losses. So it includes under measurement, but also frauds.
And then we have this other map for real losses and what would be the economic level of real losses. For example, you see here in the map in the north, there is Amazonas and there's plenty of water, but still one of the main issues was what was the existing capacity there. So even if they have lots of water, the existing capacity was not too much. So that's why the economic loss here is very low, or it was one of the factors to contribute. We teach the model mainly through conferences, but also through two learning networks. These two learning networks had two target groups. One was the utilities, and we had 65 utilities participating, and the other was the regulators group. We had 24 utilities participating, and both of them more or less for a year. And we had the topics of these learning networks was water and energy loss control. And so ELL, the Allen model, was was one of the big highlights or on the menu of this course. We hoped that with these learning networks, we would gather a critical mass of professionals that might generate momentum. In these learning networks, so we have 89 participating entities, but only 29 of them had the time and were willing to put hands on the model. We have the spreadsheets that you all know, and through many questions, we improved also the models. Some of the service providers even developed other outputs and made own variations. So it got life of its own for some. We had a major breakthrough also, and I just have to explain you or say that ARCESP is the regulation agency for SABESP. And SABESP is one of the biggest service providers worldwide, together with Mexico City and of course the Indian and the Chinese metropolitan companies. I also want to say that SABESP has their shares. They are traded in the New York Stock Exchange. So you might imagine that there are many eyes looking at what is SABESP doing and what is the regulator doing. So it has been cross-checked a lot and what is happening here. We had this lucky time window because ARCESP, the regulator, was preparing the tariff review for for 21, but they have 4 years. The tariffs are constant for 4 years. And so they were preparing the norms for the tariffs from 21 to 24. And they got interested and we stepped in. So the ELL is considered for cost consideration and also for shareholder revenue. So that's why this is important, this methodology. You can check, here is the link, you can find how they structured all the documents in order for this to be a norm. Myself, I consider that ARCESP is a front-runner regulator because it invests much time in innovation in many fields, not only here the economic level of losses. And front-runners make it easy for other regulators to replicate approaches. The risk of failure from innovation is lowered by front-runners. And also on SABESP side, they had qualified staff and they were aware of the strengths and the limitations of the model. So they also were aware, of course, for the consequences of the company. So we had here, we could see that there was a very knowledge balance from regulator and utility. It was an important balance. If you have a very autocratic regulator that imposes something, it's not so well accepted if you agree on methodologies. So Alan's told me to put here early adopters. We have, of course, ARCESP, the regulator, SABESP, this big company, and we have also some more companies and contracts, and regulators, but the information is not public yet. We also have Sanepar. I wouldn't say he's an early adopter. I would say it's a Jurassic adopter because it's very early stage with this, sticks to this model. Another topics on reality check. What we find out with the model was there are over efficiencies and we have over performers. So as you remember from Marcel, we have this, this curve. This curve exists, here it is an U, but it can be also the other way around when we have for apparent losses. And if you have this curve, you can make classifications and you say, if you are on this flat level area, then you are okay. If you are, if you have more than 5% or more than 2.5%, then you are in a yellow area. And if you are more than 5, then you are in a red area. On the other side of the curve, we have, say, the overperformers. Or if you are here too steep here on this part, it may be, we don't know if there are still advantages of being so overperformer. But on this side, we still have some environmental advantages, but on this side of the curve, we don't have any benefits from being in this area of the curve. So we checked out how the municipalities look like, and it was a big surprise for us that we have a lot of good performers, but also overperformers. So we had always that not intuition, but we thought, oh, Brazil is so bad and water losses is so bad, it's so bad, we need to improve. But not everybody. So, and it was more than we expected. More municipalities are okay than we thought they were. Another thing about reality check, or all the conversations I have been having, is that governmental actors, they prefer simplicity by having only one water loss indicator, be it percentage or liters per connection day. But I think, or I advocate that for the regulatory and environmental contract, we need to have at least 2 targets, and one for real and one for apparent losses. Because as you all know, they mean different things, they have different consequences, and they have also different time frames to address and to mitigate. My third point, the last point I want to say, is about the Brazilian outlook. And I hope that the economic level of losses will be further discussed and that more experts will be proficient in the model. There is a law from, issued last year, and it says until March 22, all service provision contracts must have water loss reduction targets. This affects more or less up to 4,000 contracts. So I think this is a big opportunity. Contracts will be revised, and stakeholders may choose to use the ELL. We run the model, put on an Excel spreadsheet with a little programming, and we for each municipality, for the 5,570 municipalities, we have the apparent loss and the real loss and the tolerance level for 2.5% and 5%. So if any municipality or stakeholders, they are not proficient with the model, but they trust us, or they think, I don't have better value, so let's use the ones that we calculated or that we got, because we have almost every values coefficients that we placed in are from public databases, with exception from alpha and beta and a few others, but not many. Most of them are public. So here we have, you can check up your values, and they are fit to be transposed for contracts if you haven't any other better values. Another thing that I think this publication is very on time is that ANA, the Federal Regulation Agency, they're working this year and the next year in 23 reference norms for the sector. And I think the ELL might have impact on 4 norms. One of the norms is guidelines for a reduction of course for water losses. The second is tariff adjustments. The third is tariff review, and also criteria for contract closure or contract ending. So these can be used with the ELL. To finish, on this link you can download our translation and also our Excel sheets where you can make your variations. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rita. You've covered a lot of ground, and I think that these institutional issues, particularly the training and outreach that you began early in the process, and getting feedback and refinement from different points of view, has really helped make the model as close to the Brazilian situation as possible. Not that it's uniform, but there are two questions here, and okay, one is the inclusion of capacity expansion costs. Why is that included? And I think the thinking is that that's not short run and the model isn't long run, if that's a way, Paul, you're thinking of the question. Is that true? I don't know if Paul can hear it. Yes, he says. Well, this is the way that I built the 2010 model, and it was largely based on the California Urban Water, sorry, I can't remember the name that Amy mentioned, and the avoided cost models that they had. What you're doing in this model, and Marcelo, please add, or Rita, is you're putting in to an OPEX, an annuity of a future capacity expansion. So it is ending up in the form of an OPEX expense. Stuart said to me at one point, don't mix APEX and CAPEX. So I guess you might say this is a different approach as compared to long and short run. And I won't say it's perfect, but Rita and Marcelo and others really looked at this carefully, and this is the direction that they went. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but do you want to add anything, Marcelo or Rita?
No, that's it. Yeah, that we need, well, yeah, that's it.
I mean, the only issue that I think could come up is that you could do other interventions besides capacity expansion that would allow you to meet customer demand, such as pressure management, which is pretty well known in Brazil. That is not in the model now. It could be. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean, models, you know, grow and evolve, but you sort of have to say, I mean, Rita had to stop me from keeping on trying to add things to the model. I hope that answers. There's also another question, which either Rita or Marcelo can answer better than me, about were other apparent losses like illegal connections and meter tampering included? And the short answer is yes. And we don't have much time, but Rita or Marcelo, if you could explain a little bit how those were taken into account.
Yes, well, for under measurement losses, we have all the data we need. We pick the databases from costs, and we know the prices and the tariffs. So that was the easy part, and we know exactly for each municipality what the under measurement level optimal is. But for frauds, we did calculate that, But we for frauds we need a baseline. We need to know what is the in order to know what is the economic level, you need to know what is the current situation. And in order to know the current situation, you need to make a sampling and check, is this illegal? Is this legal? You have to make legal checks or sampling checks. And of course, on our model, we could not, we had no data for that, or we can't say in the north or in the south, people are more, have more tendency for fraud. We did not make that, or in the cities or in the rural areas, we did not make it. But we did not, we considered it, and so they in a very small scale. And if you, as a municipality, you want to improve your model or customize it, you can improve that part of the frauds. But that was the part we had less data on current situation about frauds. But we have an approach for it. So the Portuguese version has an approach to calculate the economic level of frauds. And we even had some legal discussions, like how it is possible you can't have you can't allow frauds. Frauds have to be zero. You can't say there. But I still I think that there is an economic level for frauds, for drugs, for any illicit activity. There is an economic tolerance we should tolerate in order not to burden society with too much control.
Yes, but that part was a very recently development. I myself, I did not apply it yet, but I'm working only with the economic level of replacement meter.
Sorry, these approaches evolve and people learn. I mean, just as happened in the UK, an evolution over time. I think, well, first of all, we're about out of time. We've got about 2 minutes.
I'd like to tell you, I think it's time to say goodbye and thank you for everybody. Would you like to say the final words, please?
Yeah. There is another question from Peter Cruz. I think we'll need to get that person's email to answer it. But yes, we're about out of our time. And thank you all.
Any other questions can be sent by email, or the ones that they use the Q&A box but are not answered right now, you can mail them.
I can, well, I have everybody's email on this last slide if there's time for me to bring it up. Just a minute.
Yeah. Actually, we have 1 more minute now, Alan.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Milene. Can you see the agenda there? I got to share my screen, I guess.
Okay, and the presentation will be available on YouTube. So everybody who wants to see it again and stop and check the names and emails, I'd really like to thank you everybody for being here, and especially Rita and Marcelo and Anika and Amy and Stuart and sure Alan. Thank you very much for this.
You know, there's one other person, probably many, that I think deserves a thanks, and a person that Marcelo and Rita worked very, very closely with, Fernando Pinga, if I'm saying his last name correctly, who is about the most expert Excel person I've ever met in my life. That guy is unbelievable. To run that model for 5,000 municipalities just was amazing. And so, you know, it takes all kinds of people to do an effort like this, and he made a huge contribution. As I said at the beginning, there are other countries that have worked on ELL and have different experiences and points of view, and we might think about doing another session with some other countries. There's others in Latin America and Asia. I have to think about the time zone. Maybe it will be done in Asian time zone. But anyway, If you thought this was useful, please let us know. If you think experiences in other countries would be useful, let us know. If there are technical points you want to dive into, please let me know, in that I'm focusing on some of the questions around ELL at the request of the water loss specialist group. So with that, I will say thank you all very much, and appreciate your participation and interest. And good day, evening, or night to all of you.
Thank you very much, Alan, for our presentation and our organization for this. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.